Oh, weird. No, then I have not. That's odd.
Yeah, no, thanks, Teams.
Teams being
Uh,
teams.
Yeah, I was just about to say they're par for the course sometimes, right?
Yeah, so if you see me on here twice, that is why.
Sounds good.
Do we get double the questions from Mary? So that Mary, Matt, and I are prepared.
That's right. My clone. If only I had a clone. That would be so great, because I would take some time off and just let my clone do all the work.
Seriously.
I nominate we need 2 Steve Boyettes though.
2 Steve Boyettes,
Yes.
that would be cool.
Keep it up, honey.
All right, let me pull up
Is
and
anybody else joining us? Is Catherine? Okay.
I'll share. Yeah, I was gonna
Hi,
say, do we
Greg.
have everyone?
All right, we're ready when you are.
All right. Let me grab this screen. We're gonna go to our. Oh man, that's not where I had it. I have too many windows. Our task list. There we go. All right. So yesterday we talked a lot about kind of the customer side and how the customer setup contributes to the transactions as we go through. And then, yeah, we talked about emails, getting that set up and working. Talked a little bit about payment terms. There was a question where Steve was asking about if we use the same AP and AR. So yes, it is the same code for both. So we'll have to do some mapping there to make that work. And we're working on getting that cleaned up and configured properly. There were a couple things that were missing when we did the initial load. And then we talked about posting those invoices on the sales order. So finding that sales order where the quantity shipped is filled in and the quantity to invoice is filled in, but it has not been invoiced, and the process of going through and posting those. Any questions from yesterday? Anything that you may have thought about after the fact that you want to clarify?
Not yet. Nothing from anyone, right? You guys got it down? It's all good? No?
Yeah, I would just encourage get that login to BC and start clicking around in the sandbox, which is where you'll be. You literally can't hurt anything because we've got backups and copies of those. It's literally a place where you can just go play without any real consequences.
Yeah,
so
a lot
once
of
you
these
get that login.
licenses yet, Matt? We're working on that. We should have them next week. There is one shared license. So I think you guys have accessed that a little bit, right? I'm just in a test. Oh. So that's part of our challenge is being able to
Getting those
get, I
licenses.
did send Mark a note last night, so hopefully we can get those early next week.
And I believe the latest from our side is we've got licenses coming to cover everyone soon.
Yeah, because that would be key, because then that way they can explore on their free time and then likely have a whole bunch more questions.
Yeah. So just to reiterate what Matt is showing on screen, definitely, obviously, the speed bump is somebody has to get into BC to do this. So you're right. But again, this is functional processes or business tasks, whether you create a customer every day or once every 7 days, or whether you change payment terms once a quarter or once a year, right? Because a lot of these tables and setups, you would not go back and revisit. I mean, between now and Smart Sources, 3 entities going live, we might keep adding stuff, but once you're live in February, you're never really going to touch or add a lot more accounting setup. But that's a perfect segue into posting groups. So business processes, the day-to-day, the pages, right? Matt, maybe whenever you have BC on screen next, just kind of reiterate to everybody on the call, this is a master record. That's the way I like to explain it. That gets used when you start a document, like an order, like a CIJ or whatever. Behind the scenes, you type into the order or you type into the CIJ and you kind of post it and it vanishes and you've kind of used it. That's the usable part of BC. But in order for everything to just work, like I just said in the past 30 seconds, there's accounting setup. That is definitely we need to revisit as totally behind the scenes. Maybe not appropriate for this group, or maybe it is, but there is also accounting behind the customers, the CIJs, the receiving, the shipping, the drop ships, and all of that. What's my debit? What's my credit? When I issue a check, where is it going? Obviously, it's going to be credit bank. If you're issuing a check, like, that's kind of common sense. But so you guys see what I'm saying? So you guys need to, at least at the high level, understand that Excel task list that's being shown, many of those are day-to-day. So the people who do more day-to-day work should really be focusing and testing on those sides. And the people who have the job of kind of not doing the day-to-day data entry, but are more management or more setup focused, need to be good at their job. And then really, nobody really needs to be touching the core accounting setup, other than like maybe like a Philip, a Catherine, a Christy, a Sharon, a Steve Boyette, maybe a Mary, or maybe a Jill. But you just do that once, right? And unless you guys start a new kind of line of business, or you guys come up with some really weird scenario which doesn't fit the bill, then we don't need to come up with new bookkeeping rules, right? Does that set the stage? Like, does that make sense to everybody here?
Philip's nodding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's common.
Okay.
Yeah, common sense is kind of,
Yeah, and I mean, some of you guys have been exposed to BC, but you guys haven't been exposed to the customer vendor item part of BC. So it's like we're kind of treating you as if you guys don't know anything Navision, nothing BC, right? So it's probably a fair game because you guys, a lot of you have not even probably used or seen BC properly.
yeah, I think this is new for a lot of folks, right? Other than Philip.
Me.
You're Jennifer?
Yeah.
Hi, Jennifer, I'm Mary.
I basically didn't have to give him the jug of Kool-Aid. So he's on the Kool-Aid, but other than that, a lot of it is new to him.
Keep pouring the Kool-Aid, you guys.
All right, so let's jump into we did one quickly. I'll do one slow here on posting a sales invoice to a GL account. Okay. We talked a little bit about sales orders and invoicing. A sales invoice is basically a simplified version of a sales order where we are basically doing a financial transaction without a lot of inventory tied into it. So that's kind of the distinction that I would make between a sales order, is where we've got inventory and other transactions, and a sales invoice, which really is a single financial transaction for a customer. We'll do lots of sales orders. Sales invoices will definitely be less. So from my customer card, I clicked on New Document, Sales Invoice, which is going to create my document and pull it straight in from WAFD for this sales invoice. Okay. Once I set my customer information, everything pulls through with my dates, looks good. Let's put an external document number in. Again, we mentioned this yesterday. External document number is customer PO. So if you get let's do August web store hosting. And I don't know if that's a real scenario or not, but we will pretend that it is. Okay. So in my sales invoice, in my line section again, I'm going to change from an item because I'm going to do a GL account. In this case, I'm going to scroll down and find my sales account, or I can start typing. Here's my generic sales account. We'll talk through business practices of whether it makes sense to post directly to the sales account or whether we would want to do that through a different transaction. As of right now, this is probably our easiest one to post against, but there are some times where we would want to block that and say, hey, anytime you're posting directly to the sales, I want to have like more detail than just a single invoice. We can talk about whether that applies in this case as we get closer to kind of business rules. Okay. And again, I'm going to do a quantity of 1 and a unit price of 500. If I have another scenario and I want to do the inverse of that, I also can. I can do 500 at $1. All that really is going to flow through is my amount. So the system will let you kind of do either way. I think it probably makes sense to do it like this. Okay. We're going to keep it non-taxable for now. We'll do that later. And we have everything we needed to. Hani mentioned these posting groups. They're going to come through automatically with the setup that's done right. If you ever get an error message that says something about a posting group, then something isn't been set up correctly on the customer or the item or something along those lines, and it's not going to let you post. You'll often find those here in the line section or down in the kind of the footer in here. But we are all good to go here. This is a really simple example. We're just going to go ahead and post this invoice. Before I post it, though, I want to show you the preview posting function. So anytime you have a post button in BC, you're going to also have a preview posting that you can drop down. Preview posting is great, especially if it's a complex scenario that you're kind of working on, because it's going to run through and do all the transaction as if you were posting it, but it doesn't actually do it. And then you can look and see what entries are being made with this posting. Hani talked a little bit about this yesterday, where we have these different entry tables. Here's a good example. This invoice, really straightforward. We're going to put $500 against the sales account and $500 against our accounts receivable. But that preview is really nice if you've got, like I said, something complicated. This one's simple. We're going to put an invoice for $500 on this customer's card. And that is all I have to do in order to post that invoice.
Just a point of clarification, if you guys have watched YouTube videos or look at anything like, let's say even 2022 on YouTube or before, this is relatively a new feature, right? It only came out in the past 1.5 or 2 years. So back in the day, the concept was you would post the document like a transfer. You guys don't know what a transfer order is because you don't have warehouses anymore. But you would post an invoice, you would post a GL entry, you would post some kind of payroll entry, you would post some kind of credit memo or PO, and then you could say, oh, it's affected this table, that table, that table, that table. The preview posting is kind of, and most accountants on this call will get this, it's a pro forma entry. So it's like, it's a fake way of saying, if I post this, it's going to post like this. So that's where the benefit is. And most accountants, including me, jumped around for like 20 minutes on a happy dance on when this came out. Because you're like, you can really see the journal entry before the journal entry happens. You see where I'm going with this? But just be careful. Preview post does not mean it's posted. Well, that's where a lot of new folks to BC get confused. They're like, oh, I saw the entry. I'm like, no, you just saw the preview posting. You actually still have to post it, right? So just making that very clear for the accountants, which I think most of the people are here.
So I have a question. So do you have like a scenario of when we would do a sales invoice? Because we don't normally do this. It's always based on an order. So like, could you give us an example of why we would do a sales invoice?
Do you charge customers for web store hosting fees? I think I saw that somewhere.
Yeah, but usually it's on an order or on a billing worksheet. We've never just billed it separately, I guess.
Yeah, we do the same thing, Matt. It normally is going to come through an order so that we have the order history of what's going on for hosting, warehousing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so then we probably won't use this functionality much. Yeah.
I can
we'll have
see
them tied into the
when,
order.
like, I can see when it would be helpful because I do invoices for quarterly to our Source Logistics because we get like some commission on some stock that we sent over to them. So I usually do a invoice, but it's like a dummy invoice because they require one to send us a check
Mhm.
for the quarterly commission, and then I just delete it. So it's not in the system. So maybe in that case, this would come in handy, and then I can code it to the GL and then.
Yep, to the GL commissions line.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that'd be a good example. Mhm. Yeah, what's nice about that?
Some of,
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Matt, sorry.
No.
I was just gonna say, kind of off of what Jill was saying earlier, there are some of Tammy's orders that aren't attached, like I just create sales invoices for that aren't actually tied to a job. I didn't really say anything before because I figured maybe some of that would change. I figured there's a lot of changes coming when it comes to the one-offs that Tammy does.
What are you invoicing for?
I would say release charges. It's our McMinimum's web store that we have for them. Their releases.
So you're billing like order charges, line charges, receipt charges, that type of stuff?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, it's just I don't really know who runs the report for me, but it's a McMinimum's monthly billing for their web store releases that I get at the end of every month. That I have to take the whatchamacallit, the spreadsheet that they send me, and then I create an invoice in SmartBooks and kind of calculate the warehouse fees and the freights that are associated with the previous month.
Yeah, I would think with the new process that we wouldn't do that anymore. That would be all entered as an order by the PM from what everything's
That's
done up
correct.
front. So I
Yeah,
think that will
that's
change,
correct.
Caitlin.
Okay.
It'll make
So
our
the-
life really easy.
Charge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's our goal, is to have all of that kind of flowing with the specific orders. And then when we do kind of the monthly or the recurring ones, we'll have those lines pull in. We're still working on automating that process and what that looks like. We may actually have that fall into an invoice because it's going to be an accumulation of multiple orders rather than it's like your monthly release fee, monthly storage fee, right? That's a single line. I don't want to try and split that against 17 different inventory lines or order lines. So like I said, we'll figure out what that looks like on the automation process, but we may use that sales invoice just to make it simpler to post, so we don't have to deal with any inventory or warehouse transactions. So that may be a slight change for you guys, Steve, that we do it as an invoice rather than an order.
See,
Once
that's
we
exactly what
automate it.
she's talking about, is what I bill for Fairfield. Exactly the same thing.
You want to say that, ask your question, Michelle, or?
I'm not sure there's a question, because from what I understand, they're gonna be monthly buyout orders now. Instead of just giving me reports, because basically all Vericore billing I do is a sales invoice. There's no order associated to it. In this world, it's a sales invoice. So it's the same thing. What Caitlin is just talking about is what
Right, so you're billing release charges, storage, warehousing.
warehousing that could be VAS stock, all combined into one.
Yeah, so I think we will try and get as many of those as possible onto order lines rather than kind of an accumulation. That doesn't mean we won't have an accumulated summarized invoice that shows all of the charges for the month with totals, rather than, let's say they have 800 orders that go out for the month, and we don't want to have 800 individual lines of release charges. We would have a summarized invoice with the detail available, but that would actually fall under an order because it's going to be tied to each transaction for the releases. The storage like I said, I think storage this is where it's going to fall, is into a sales invoice because it's not tied to a specific transaction. It's a monthly recurring charge.
Yeah, I mean,
So the
I think
invoice-
because K Smith isn't gonna be a manufacturing company anymore, it's gonna be third party, so the workflow is gonna change. We're not gonna, like those Veracor reports, I mean, we're basically gonna get an invoice from Excel with all those charges because we're not gonna be managing the warehouse. It's gonna be third party, so it can't, I guess, the whole workflow from the beginning to how we bill it is gonna change, so. I think in my mind, it's gonna work all kind of like a buyout or, like how we process the buyouts, cause we're gonna be getting a vendor invoice for everything, cause we're not gonna be a production company, we're not gonna have a warehouse, it's just strictly sales.
Right, so you can't split warehouse costs, storage bin costs with releases.
No, well, I don't know, it depends on how they wanna record that. I'm not sure how Smart Source does it, if they wanna break it out. Cause right now, like all our buyouts is coded to 1GL. I don't know if you wanna break it out depending on what type of, I guess product it is, if it's a warehouse or if it's a promo item or brochures. You guys go that
No,
deep?
we're looking at the account as a whole,
Okay.
is what Smart Source does. So like if you're dealing with shipping things out of a warehouse, there is usually an order charge, for them to just pick the order. And then there's normally a line charge for, however many lines that we released on that order. So if we have an order for McMinimans that, it's this order and there's 5 lines on it, then there's 1 order charge and 5 line charges on that. And so we know that within the system about how many lines, how many lines were on the order and what came out of the warehouse for that. Now, in the case of storage, and we don't break that down by, oh, here's the promo items, here's the, brochure items, that kind of stuff. It's just at the account as a whole, because when your customer's entering orders on the web portal, they're ordering all sorts of stuff. So that's how that works. And then what we normally do is at the end of the month, and usually we're billing a month in arrears because we don't have the information usually from the warehouses as to what the storage charges are. But then we are usually sent information from the warehouse that says, okay, for this customer, the storage charge is $100. For this one, it's $250, and things like that.
And those storage charges by customer, well, you probably don't have a distinction. That's where I think it makes sense to use the sales invoice rather than a sales order, because there's really no inventory, there's no warehouse transaction. It's just pure billing.
Yeah, what we do is we actually, for the most part, what we do is we run that through an automated process that creates an order.
Yeah.
That breaks it out. So instead of somebody having to generate 300 sales invoices individually off of a report, we take that Excel spreadsheet, we get it in a format that works so that we create the orders, and then we just push it through as a and forgive me, Matt, I don't remember what it's called, but what is it, a resource charge? Kind of what we're doing with like the special charge type stuff.
Yeah, the item charges.
Yeah. So the item charges are normally done as a resource charge using Business Central logic. There.
Just to clarify, because I heard lots of things as an accountant, and you're talking about billing charges to a customer, which is money that it's the receivable. You're going to get money from a customer, but first you need to know what the warehouse is charging you, so that you could technically like mark it up a little bit and then charge the customer. Am I on the correct page here? Because Steve, you were just talking about.
We all are aware that sometimes we know that there's a cost for it, Now,
Yeah.
whether or not that turns around and gets invoiced to the customer or not depends upon the
Okay.
relationship and what the contract is with the customer and what we sell
No.
that for.
I know, but Steve, you were just talking about receiving the data from the warehouse like a month late, but that is just cost of business of SmartSource and Kate Smith. That's a P&L expense. But here, Matt is talking about charging receivables to a customer, right? We're talking about two different things here.
Yeah, what we normally do is we would take normally we would take the AP invoice from the warehouse, and we're going to post that to warehouse expense, and then so we're not trying to split that AP invoice against 300 customers. We just record the payable for it at that point, and then what we do is we invoice the customer for if we're billing it.
And but is there a curl? So, but is there? I mean, it might not be entered in the ERP in BC, but one sales invoice, a receivable, let's say for $170 of fees this week or this month. Is there a relationship to the $1,000 warehouse bill, the AP bill that you got? And you may not want to break up the $1,000 AP invoice or the payable invoice, but what I can do, and Matt, myself or Matt, either one of us could do, is we need to have a session with you guys on AP and more GL and say, this is how you record, and this is where the wonderful world of Dimensions comes in, right? And you guys, some of you know it, some of you don't know it, but you can keep the same GL account, but there is a function called Dimensions, which is a tag, without going into it a lot, and you can actually start dimensionizing, and there's efficiency hacks, like how to like if my last month's AP invoice was 61 lines, how do I, and Matt showed this yesterday, how do I copy documents so I don't have to sit there for 20 minutes and type out 61 lines again this month, right? So there's efficiency tools on how to redo a task. Again, data entry, change the numbers, use something called recurring purchase line. So there's a whole admin side of operational inventory. We don't have to talk about that today on this call, but we can have a session today, tomorrow, whatever. You guys are ready for that. But what Matt is talking about is how do we bill a customer for a charge? And if that is a positive amount, then that'll be a valid receivable, and hopefully the following month you get money, right? And that's revenue to you. Right. So I'm just trying to put the line in the sand between the things, because there was a lot of discussions on both sides of AP and AR. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, so on the warehouse side, when we get those bills from our 3PLs, we'll put those in as a payable, like you're saying, Steve, and then we'll have a large number of individual invoices to the customers as their portion of that cost, but we don't really need to tie it back, right? Because you don't want to try and split 61 ways, like you said. We'll just have one big invoice for the 3PL and a bunch of smaller invoices on the customer side.
What we currently do is we know what our quote unquote cost is for every order and every line. We know what the rates are in terms of the cost. So those go against each order automatically as a cost, because we already know that it's going to be $1, $2, whatever it is.
Yeah, based on the contract you have with your 3PL.
That's exactly right.
Okay. All right. So just to kind of keep us moving, we can kind of step off that. But yeah, I think the sales invoices are going to be our most valuable tool for kind of those recurring charges that are not inventory or warehouse line specific. And then we can talk through the credit memo side, which would be kind of the offset of that, because I think that is our next list. Yeah. Create and post a sales credit memo to a GL account. So again, from my customer card, I've got a little shortcut to create my sales credit memo. Set my entity to K Smith. just to show you guys kind of what I'm doing, I'm clicking into that number. The shortcut dimension 2 code we're not using, we'll have that hidden by the time we go live. In test, you'll still see it. You can just leave it blank. When I click on this number, I'm just hitting tab to move to the next field, and that auto assigns that document number. We've got some fixes and some tweaks to that setup, but those should start filling in automatically. And then you see that because I came from my WAFD customer card, it filled in that. So again, I'm checking my dates. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and put my external document number and just say hosting fee refund for August. So let's say I billed 500 and I need to give them a credit for 150. So I can come in here and create my sales credit memo and change it from, again, from item to GL account. We do have a warehouse fees. Yeah. So let's pretend like that invoice that I did earlier was to this storage and warehousing account versus the sales account. I'm going to go ahead and put my credit memo against this warehouse fee. And fill out my quantity and my price. And there is something I can do to apply this to another invoice. So I'm not going to right now. I'll show you it here in a second, but because I want to show you manual application of entries. So I'm just going to go ahead and post this. So this is going to put $150 credit on their account. All right, I'm not going to open up my credit memo. It's fine. So now I'm back in my customer card. If I come and look at their balance, again, clicking on that number takes me to my list of all my outstanding customer ledger entries. Now I can see I've got an invoice that I posted today and a credit memo. So I've got a $500 invoice and a $150 credit memo. Both of these are still in open status. Like we talked yesterday, that's our kind of toggle to show if stuff has been closed out. But what I want to do is I want to apply that credit memo to my invoice that I created. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select my line and I'm going to come up to apply entries. From a high level, what applying entries does in BC, and this may be similar to your existing systems, is it basically closes out transactions where there's a receivable and a payment, an invoice and a credit memo. Basically, it's closing out and reconciling the documents to each other, and the remaining amount is what is affected. So I'll show that how that works now. Go ahead and click on Apply Entries. It brings up my little window here. So it's saying you're trying to apply, as of today, a credit memo to WAFD Bank, and my amount is $150. I have $150 that is remaining to be applied. Okay. And then down in this, I've got all of my outstanding invoices that this customer owes me for. This is everything that's open. So I could choose any number of ways to apply this credit memo. The same thing applies for payments. So when I receive a payment, I can choose how I want to apply. The field that matters is this amount to apply. So I could do a couple of different things. I could come in here and manually say, I want $50 here and 50 here and 50 here. So I'm posting against these three invoices. It tells me what my amount that I'm going to apply, and I could go ahead and post those. Most likely, though, I'm guessing your business rules are that you post any payment or a credit memo against your oldest transaction. The nice thing about BC is it sorts by due date. So my oldest transaction is actually this invoice here that's past its due date of a couple of days ago. My most recent one is my $500 one that I did just today and is due today, so it's the newest. If my credit memo was larger than my invoices, I can choose multiples and it will apply oldest to newest. And I'll show you how that works. When I go in here, I can select a line and hit this set applies to ID. So I'm going to override this and I'm going to apply this credit memo to my invoice that I just created. Okay, so I click that. It sets my name as the applies to ID so that I have a record of who did the application. And it tried to grab all 500. You can see I'm now out of balance, right? So I've applied 500. My available amount was only 150. I'm out of balance here. So I can change this here to my 150. It then updates and corrects my balance to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and post that application. Okay. It's going to ask me for a document number, which is my credit memo, and a posting date. And I can hit OK. So now I'm back in my customer ledger entries, and my credit memo no longer shows on my list because it's closed, and my remaining amount is $350 on this $500 invoice. Okay. So does that, are there any questions on applying credit memos or payments to invoices? Make sense? Logical?
They're nodding. So
I'll take quiet as a good sign.
Yeah, what I would say is, and I think, Philip, we talked about this on our Monday call, is there needs to be a giant line in the sand of once something hits the customer ledger entry or the vendor ledger entry, and this is again, Steve, you guys may need to change this after you guys have gone live, but for the next, I would say 4 or 5 months, the CaseMeth finance team can kind of do this on their own. Once something has gone debit, revenue, credit, debit, receivable, credit, sales. So the customer ledger entry is on screen, the $500, the $200. There needs to be a separation between the people who do the collections, do the banking, the money comes in, the deposit comes in, somebody partially paid the $500, somebody overpaid the $1285, or well, how do I take overpayment? So there's a whole administrative side of receivables. Then on the other side, there's a whole administrative side of vendor ledger entries. How do I pay the check? How do I do the ACH, bank recs, and things like that? So what Matt and I are gonna try to again do is, you guys need to internally delineate the tasks between who is the person taking care of the receivables and the collection, and who's the person taking care of the payables and money out part, right? And whatever Matt and I are showing, because we will go onto both sides of the wall very quickly. But if you guys have clear segregations internally, then set that up. Let me know. If you want me to do training with the banking and AP and AR folks, I can do that as well. And Matt is more focused on the overall project as well as getting the actual sales order in or the sales invoice in, so that you guys actually post the correct customer ledger entry. So you see where I'm going with this? So there's a whole admin side of finance, and then there's a whole operational side of finance. If you guys think that way. Questions? And that may be very different than what you do today in 3 ERPs.
any questions, you guys? No, I think they're good.
All right. So let me go back to my list. So we created our credit memo. We applied our open entries. Let's go. I skipped this one. We'll come back to the sales return order in a minute. But now let's go to unapply entries. So we accidentally applied that to the current invoice, but then when we set the statement, they were like, hey, why is my invoice that's a week old, why did that not get paid? I thought that we were going to apply the credit memo to my oldest invoice. So I can again come into my customer ledger entries by clicking on that. And if I scroll over a little bit, I can see I found my invoice for $500. I have a little fact box over here. So for this line that I'm selected, it gives me my details, and I can see that I've got 1 applied entries. I can click on this, or I can come up here and go to unapply entries. So it's saying, yep, you applied this credit memo to this invoice and what date it was done. And I can go in. I'll show you the preview, basically just like on the posting. It's not going to let me preview it. Let's just unapply it. Okay, so it's basically going to say, oh, yep, I'm going to put a correcting entry, which basically is a background thing that says this was unapplied. And it is now unapplied, and I'm back to where I was just a few minutes ago with a $500 outstanding invoice and a $150 credit memo. But then I could come in and say, oops, let me go and apply that to your oldest invoice here. Let me drop in my $150, and I can post my application. Okay. Pretty straightforward. The key thing to remember is that unapply entries is hidden behind the apply entries. You have to hit the drop down to find it. Or if you come in here, oops, if I click on this applied entries, then I can come in and, oh, I can't even do it from here. This is just informational. Yeah, that's what I thought. So that'll give me information. If I do want to unapply it, I have to hit the drop down. Okay. So that is applying and unapplying entries on a customer ledger card. We talked about credit memos as kind of an offset to a sales invoice, and just to kind of keep it from a high level. Again, sales order, inventory transaction, sales invoice is kind of purely a financial transaction. Same thing goes on the reversals. A sales credit memo, which is what we created, is generally just a purely financial transaction where there's no inventory or warehouse transaction related to it. A sales return order is the opposite of a sales order. And the idea behind that is if we have inventory coming back into the warehouse or something like that, we would need to create a sales return order. I know you don't often have returned inventory because it's probably rare that you allow customers to do that. But in the case where you may, and even if it's going to be destroyed, we want to account for that in our sales return order. Is that something you guys do, or is that someone else that handles that process?
We actually do have sales return orders through the web store, and so we have to issue them a credit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more driven by the sales side, they issue that, but I wouldn't say we have a lot, but that does happen.
Okay. So let's go ahead and walk through it. And I would assume that the salesperson is going to say, hey, yep, I'm authorizing this return because vendor sent it wrong, or we messed up the settings or whatever. And we need to take a return where they send us the product back and issue a credit as well.
Yeah, usually right now the workflow is there's a smart sheet and they log in the returns. And so I'm supposed to go in there weekly and then see if there were any returns, because I got to a lot of them are put on their credit card. So I got to issue a refund on their through Authorized Net.
Yep.
So
I think we'll have a decision for that when we talk about credit card payments, but we'll deal with that later.
Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully you don't have to go to a separate system to do it. We can do it within BC with our credit card plugin.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go to sales return orders. Okay. So let's go ahead and there. You notice I searched for it. I'll go back and show it. I don't have that in my shortcuts. It's a silly thing that BC does not have, where you don't get to create a sales return order straight from this little shortcut new document. So I can create one from the generic sales return order page. Okay, I'm just going to hit new, set my entity. Again, click into my number to assign the number. I'm going to grab my customer name. Got to do that here in customer number. SRO, or what do you have, like a return authorization? Do you give a number for that when you go to the smart sheet, Jill?
Yeah, usually it's the original order, the sales
Okay.
order, so.
And those are typically web orders, right, Jill?
What was that, Mary?
Those are typically web orders, right? So when we issue
Yes.
it, when I do it
Correct.
from VC, I put in the order number when I issue the credit.
Yeah, they're the ones that you used to do, and then we started having Laurel do it.
So I'm putting this in. I will show you when we do a sales return order from a shipped sales order, the system will tie it to that order, and I'll show you where that kind of flows through in the comments. So generally what the external document number is some sort of an RMA number if the salesperson has authorized it, or you can just put in and say approved by Mary. But that will go on the customer or the sales credit memo. So if it's internal, I guess maybe not. As I think through it, that might not make sense. We could do that here in the your reference, which would be only internal. Okay, so I've got my header. I chose my customer. Everything looks good. I'm going to come in here to prepare, and I'm going to get posted document lines to reverse. So this is a nice little shortcut that BC has. It's going to let us grab any documents that have been posted on this customer account. And I can then say, oh, yep, it was web order such and such. Here's my invoice number. This is what I need to return or create a return order for.
So will it automatically issue a credit then when you do it that way to that is that an invoice?
Yeah, so it will create a credit memo that applies to the invoice.
That's nice, because I gotta manually issue a credit for those.
Yeah. Yep. So I'll show you how that works. So we're going to select this first line. I could select multiple lines. If I come here and say select more, I could grab this one and this one. I'm just going to do one to keep it simple, and it's just going to be this first line, which is the line I have selected. It tells me how many have not been returned. So this kind of is a way to check to make sure that they have not tried to return more than we shipped them initially. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And you can see it added all my information. So it said, hey, this is invoice number 103040. Here's the shipment number so that we can see internally. And this is the item that was shipped and invoiced on the initial order. Quantity was 100,000 at 15 cents each. Let's say we're returning 10,000 of them. The box got damaged. So the unit price has been changed. It's fine. As soon as I change the quantity, it kind of gets frustrated. So I'll go back and say, yeah, it was the 15 cents was what my price was. Okay. And so now if I were to just post this right now, it would issue a credit memo. And I'll show what that looks like. So let's go here, preview posting. Oh, does not contain a quantity or a amount. Okay. I'm going to try and fix this to default on sales return orders, but you can see I've got 10,000. It's requiring a warehouse transaction. Let me see if it'll let us do it manually. I don't think it will. Yeah. So because this warehouse, this location, which is our Renton location, and we're returning it back there, any transaction that involves the warehouse, we require a warehouse receive and a warehouse shipment. That's how we integrate with Vericore, is through those transactions. So this scenario, it's requiring us to create a warehouse receipt. Think of that as an EA for the warehouse that says, hey, you're going to get 10,000 of these envelopes coming back in. I think that's a little clunky and probably not the way we want to handle it. I'm open to feedback. I think we're probably not going to have that show up in the warehouse, or are we going to actually want to let them know that something's coming in?
We normally do now.
Say that again.
We put an item on order with the quantity, so we do it now.
Okay. All right. I mean, I like that because that is the cleanest way to show the full transaction going all the way through, coming back into the warehouse, whether we decide to destroy it or not. Once it hits the warehouse, that's probably the best way to do it. Okay. So I'm not going to be able to post this return order until my warehouse receives the inventory in. So I can't issue my credit to the customer until we get the product back. So I'm going to go ahead and just release my sales return order, which tells the system I'm done. I've done what I need to. And then I'm going to create my warehouse receipt. So this is going to tell the warehouse. This is basically the information that goes to the Vericore system and tells the Renton folks that we've got a sales return order for 10,000 of these envelopes that are going to be coming in at some point. If I'm looking at it on my side, I'm done, but I can't invoice this and post this, which will issue that credit until that's received. And that's where I think it's clunky. I would imagine now you can just put in the notice and then create the credit memo. Well, you're probably creating it manually, huh?
So would you get notified when they checked it in, or do you have to just go in there and look?
We would have to just look at the sales return orders, just like we do the sales orders that are ready to invoice.
Okay. Yeah, that might be a problem because a lot of the, we issue the refund right away. And I don't know how Tammy would, for her clients to wait till we get the product. I mean, but it makes sense that we should do that because right now we never even know. We issue the credit. We never know if we even get the product back, and nobody, I don't think nobody double checks that we ever get it back. We may not.
Mm-hmm.
I think Laurel does. I think we don't issue
Okay.
it until the chance to review it, right? Because sometimes stuff will come back and it's not in good shape, right? So typically they will inspect it, and then if it's in good condition, they'll return it to shelf, and then we issue the credit.
Okay, that's not how we used to do it, but maybe we changed it.
We're trying to improve, Jill.
Okay.
I mean, like you said, it makes sense, right? The system's set up that it says, hey, you can't issue this credit until you get the product in that you can verify that A, it's been received, and B, that it matches what the condition they said was the problem. Then I'll issue you the credit. Until then, I mean, if you send a return to Amazon or Apple or someone else, they're not going to give you a credit until you actually send it. So that's kind of the idea. From a business perspective, I think, Steve, do you guys handle return orders? What's your workflow there? Do we want to try and match that? Putting you on the spot, I know.
I'm just trying to think what we do there. Return orders. When we're dealing with inventory, we normally
You wait until the warehouse lets you know that it came in. Or
we normally
credit?
wait till the warehouse tells us that we got it back.
Yeah.
And then once we know that we got it back from them, then we do a return to stock and issue the credit. Yeah. Credit the credit card, if that's what needs to happen.
Yeah. Okay. So if that's the case, and I think that's best practices from our perspective. If we were to tell you kind of what we would recommend, would be to use a sales return order, go ahead and release it, create that warehouse shipment, and then either somehow the warehouse lets you know that, hey, this product came in and yeah, does look bad. We need to issue the credit, or we can go into our list of sales return orders and have that as something we check daily of what's been received versus what is ready to invoice. So I'm going to cheat here and create my, go to my warehouse shipment. I'm going to pretend like it's a warehouse receipt. Pretend like I'm the warehouse here and go ahead and post this. Okay. I'm going to come back to the starting page, pretending like I'm now a couple of days later and I'm checking my sales return orders. It's probably a good idea to just have this as a reviewable screen anyway, but I've got a status, and then I can add in, I'm going to personalize my page here. and add in why is it saying shipped, not received? Doesn't even give me that on my filter list. This is what I would want to do, where my receive is yes. So I could save this as a second view and say received, ready to invoice. So this would be my list of everything where the warehouse has come through and acknowledged and received it on their side. And then this shows that it's ready to be received or ready to be invoiced. So I'm going to open that back up, come in and check my lines. You'll see that the pattern is across all of the system where I've got my 4 boxes here, right? Return quantity to receive, return quantity received. So I have received it, to invoice, invoiced. So now because the warehouse has done that transaction, they let us know that it really was bad, I can issue my credit memo. So I can just straight up post this credit memo. And what you'll see, there we go. I thought that might be the case. General posting setup. And that was customer, and it was retail. We need a credit memo account. Hani, will you make a note to talk to the Smart Source folks about that? I'm just going to put it into our sales account, but
we need a version of this because K-Smith is adopting the chart of accounts of Smart Source. So we'll just set it up the way they're going to use it, and then behind the scenes, the setup should just be there. Right. So.
Okay, so I got my credit memo. It's showing here just that it's the $1,500 that is coming through. But I haven't applied this. So if I were to post this, it would just post to my customer account and say, yep, you have a credit memo. You can apply it to whatever you'd like. If I want to go ahead and force that apply to this invoice, like you were talking, Jill, I come down here to the invoice details. I can grab this applies to document type, so invoice, and then I can come into my 3 dots for applies to document number, choose which of the WAFD invoices I want this to apply to, which I don't remember which one I did. 103040. Expand my little window here. Great, so this is what I want it to apply to. 1,500. And okay. And now it will apply automatically this credit memo to that invoice as soon as I post it. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay. So that's a nice little shortcut that's in there to apply that automatically. I'll get all the way back to my customer card. If I click on my balance, I can now see that the invoice that we were just looking at, 103040, my remaining amount is reduced by the $1,500 that I applied on that credit memo. I can also look at my applied entries to see that I've got my 2 applied entries on that. Okay.
So what if it was done in a different period, like, you know, like let's say in October is we did the return. So how does that affect the jail? Obviously that credit, it will be for October, because did we even put a date in or?
Yeah, we did all the current date. Today's date was the day we did on everything. Yeah.
So like for a credit, like if you did it, like if it was for a refund in, like, let's say in October and they returned it, then we would just use the current, we would always use the current date.
Yes, because you don't want to post back into the prior periods. The system will allow you to post as far back as you're allowed to, which should always be the current month, unless you have permission and an exception. But yeah, it'll post it as far back as you can, but it will be into the current month.
Because I thought I saw, like when I was looking at an invoice, there's a function where you could issue a credit right from the invoice when I was looking at one.
Mhm. I'm sighing. There's this correct button which would reverse it. It's a shortcut Microsoft created. Hani and I have strong opinions on how bad it is.
Oh, don't use it then. Can you like block it? Because we have the same issue with SmartBooks right now where you can just reverse an invoice, but it does it actually backdates it. So it could be 3 months ago and it will change the GL from, previous month. So
So
is that
your-
how?
Your bookkeeping admin side of things will stop you from booking 3 months ago, so don't worry about that part. So there's
Okay.
rules. But
Okay.
yeah, there's variations of those reversals, and it kind of takes you, it does half the work and it doesn't, you have to do the manual second step. So copy
Okay.
document what Matt showed you. Again, I think we can have as many calls as you want to make the operational accounting team, the people who actually need and will want to test this kind of training. I can be on calls with you guys every day for an hour and a half, and we can walk you through it. Like there's not a lot of time to do this, but this operational applying, not applying, payments, money in, money out, doing a regular GL entry, putting in payroll, all of that kind of stuff. Let's do that and put it to bed. But really, the big elephant in the room is getting in the orders through the system, right? That's what Matt is primarily focusing on.
Okay.
And
So-
we do have to hop to another call, unfortunately. Happy to continue with these. I think these have been good. Let me know. I mean, I'd love some feedback, Mary, if you want to kind of get from the group of how we want to continue training.
Yeah, definitely, because we pick this back up next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get licenses to everybody. I'll ask Mark about what the ETA is on those, because I think it'll be more meaningful when they have time to get in there and
Yeah.
explore.
Yep.
So,
And we've got
Does
some more.
anybody from this accounting group want to meet Friday afternoon with me if you want to have like a working session, just like an open hour? I have time this Friday if you want to take advantage of it.
Can we get back to you on that?
No problem.
great. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys.
Yep.
Appreciate
No
it.
problem.
Thanks,
I-
everyone.
I just have
Thanks, guys.
one question. Do you guys have a live date? Because I've been hearing a lot of, I don't know if they're rumors. I heard that we were gonna go live on September, is it?
There are no
September
firm dates
9th.
at this point.